a small, tight-knit town, one moment of prejudice inside a local diner sparks a chain reaction no one could have seen coming. When the longtime owner makes a shocking decision to deny service to a respected war veteran, he thinks he's made his stance clear and that the situation is handled. But he couldn't be more wrong. What he doesn't realize is that someone with real influence is about to challenge everything. Someone who's seen enough injustice to finally push back. What follows will not only stir the entire town, but also deliver a powerful message about respect, redemption, and the courage to confront what's wrong. Before we dive into this powerful story, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if stories like this resonate with you, hit that subscribe button to never miss the moments that matter. John Carter let out a slow sigh as he stepped down from his old pickup, joints aching from years of honorable service. The warm southern sun kissed his lined face as he looked up at the faded sign of Tom's Diner. A soft smile played on his lips. This place had always been a second home, good food, familiar faces, and simple peace. As he pushed open the door, the familiar jingle of bells rang out, and the scent of hot coffee and frying bacon filled the air. But something was off. The usual chatter dropped into an awkward hush. People stared, not with recognition, but with something colder. He took a seat at his usual spot at the counter, trying to shrug off the tension. Maybe it was just his imagination. But then, Tom Harris stepped out from the kitchen, not with his usual grin, but with a look as cold as stone. "What can I get you today, John?" Tom's voice was flat, almost hostile. Still smiling, John replied gently, "Just the usual, Tom. A coffee and a slice of that famous apple pie." But Tom's jaw tightened. "We're out of pie," he said, even though John could clearly see a freshly baked one behind him. "Tom, I can see—" "I said we're out," Tom snapped, loud enough to make people flinch. "We're closing early today. You need to leave." Silence swallowed the room. John sat there, stunned. In all the years he'd been coming here, he'd never experienced anything like this. Confused and hurt, he slowly stood. "Did I do something to offend you?" Tom's voice dropped, sharp and cruel. "You did plenty just by walking in. I don't serve your kind. Now get out before I call the cops." The words struck like a punch. John's breath caught. He stared at Tom, someone he once called a friend, and saw nothing but hate. Shoulders heavy with disbelief, he turned to leave. Suddenly, a young woman at a nearby table stood up. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't treat him like this." Tom whipped around. "This is my diner," he barked. "And if you don't like it, you can leave too." She froze, torn between her conscience and her fear. In the end, she sat back down, ashamed. As the door shut behind John, hushed voices filled the diner. Some guests paid and left, unable to stay in a place that tolerated such ugliness. Others sat still, either in silent agreement or stunned disbelief. What Tom didn't realize was that this moment, his moment of cruelty, was about to turn his life upside down, because John Carter wasn't just a veteran, he was someone with reach, someone who'd spent a lifetime earning respect in places Tom could only dream of. And soon, the town would learn that standing by isn't the same as standing up. Tom Harris had just made the worst mistake of his life, and the ripple effect? It was just getting started. Staring blankly through the windshield, John Carter felt the sting of humiliation settle deep in his chest. The pain came in waves, sharp, steady, relentless. But then, slowly, something inside him shifted. His jaw clenched, his eyes hardened. The sadness didn't disappear, but it made room for something else. Determination. John Carter wasn't just an old veteran. He was a man of principle, a man who had faced enemies on foreign soil, and now he was facing one at home. As the engine roared to life beneath him, John's mind was already racing. He might have been shown the door at Tom's Diner, but this was far from the end. What Tom Harris didn't realize was that this one act of cruelty would set off a chain of events that would shake the town to its very core. Meanwhile, back at the diner, Tom Harris was already feeling the consequences. A few regulars had walked out, some throwing sharp looks over their shoulders, but Tom stayed rooted, his face set with stubborn pride. In his mind, He was doing what his father would have expected of him, what he believed was right. So why did his gut twist with unease? Outside those diner walls, word was spreading fast. Neighbors whispered on porches and gathered in corners. No one could believe it. Tom Harris, the friendly diner guy, was hiding that kind of hate? And then, over 1,000 miles away, the news reached one person who took it personally, Michael Carter, John's son. Sitting in his office in Washington, D.C., Michael took the call. And as the story unfolded over the phone, his grip on the receiver tightened until his knuckles turned white. Because Michael Carter wasn't just any son. He was a U.S. Senator, a champion for civil rights, a man who had fought on Capitol Hill for justice and fairness, and now his own father had been targeted by hate. The irony hit hard, and it lit a fire in him. Michael could have made one phone call and ended Tom's career, his reputation, and his business. But he knew better than anyone that anger often widens the divide. What Tom Harris had done didn't just deserve punishment, it deserved a wake-up call that would last a lifetime. So Michael picked up his phone again, not to destroy, but to change the game. He called in favors. He made arrangements. What was coming next wouldn't be loud. It would be powerful. And Tom Harris had no idea it was headed straight for him. As the sun dipped below the horizon in that quiet southern town, a storm was forming, not of violence, but of reckoning. One man's hate was about to be met by another man's unwavering resolve to defend dignity, not with fists, but with action. And what came next would change the town forever. But before we go further, if you're moved by stories of justice, courage, and redemption, give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe. We've got more stories like this, and we want you with us for everyone. The next morning broke bright and peaceful, but something in the air had changed. The streets buzzed with tension. People weren't just talking, they were watching, waiting. The story of what happened to John Carter had traveled far beyond the diner's walls, and now the town held its breath. Tom Harris arrived early, as he always did, but this time, something was different. Outside his diner, a small group had gathered, holding handmade signs. No to racism. Dignity for all. Tom's face turned red as he pushed past them, unlocking the door with shaky hands. Inside, he tried to focus on routine, but nothing felt normal. Each time the doorbell jingled, he flinched. And then, it happened. Right at the peak of the lunch rush, the bell rang again. Tom looked up and froze. A stranger stood in the doorway. He wasn't from around here. Tall, impeccably dressed. Calm, but commanding. Every eye in the diner turned. The man walked forward with quiet confidence, stopping in front of the counter. "Are you Tom Harris?" he asked, voice smooth but edged with steel. Tom nodded, unsure why his throat had gone dry. He didn't recognize the man, but soon he'd wish he had. Michael Carter studied Tom Harris for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then quietly but firmly he said, "I'm Michael Carter, John Carter's son, and we need to talk about what happened here yesterday." Tom's stomach dropped. He had vaguely heard people whisper that John had a son in politics, but he'd always brushed it off as small-town gossip. Now, standing face-to-face with the truth, a flicker of fear crept in, but pride and deep-seated prejudice drowned it out. Tom straightened. "I don't care who you are," he snapped. "This is my business, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone I choose." Michael's voice remained calm, but his eyes narrowed with a cold edge. "Is that so? Then tell me, on what grounds did you deny service to my father? A man who served this country, who's been part of this town longer than you've owned that apron?" Tom's face turned red. "I don't owe you an explanation," he spat. "Your father and people like him aren't welcome here. That's all there is to it." A hush fell across the diner. Every customer was watching now, some with horror, some with stunned silence. Michael didn't move. His voice, when he spoke again, was quiet, controlled, deadly serious. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I hoped we could have a respectful conversation. But now I see that's not possible. So let me be clear. What you did yesterday wasn't just offensive. It was illegal. And I will use every resource available to make sure you answer for it. Tom's confidence wavered. You can't do that. This is still my place. Michael leaned in, his voice cold. You really have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm not just John Carter's son. I'm a United States Senator. I've spent my career fighting the very kind of hatred you proudly displayed yesterday. And just like that, the blood drained from Tom's face. He'd thrown out the father of a U.S. Senator, a man with power, connections, and now consequences were coming. Michael turned to leave. You'll be hearing from me again very soon. As the door closed behind him, a wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Tom just stood there, frozen, the full weight of what he'd done finally settling in. For the first time, he wondered, had he crossed a line he couldn't come back from? But it was already too late. Michael Carter's visit was only the beginning. The wheels of justice were now in motion. Outside, Michael's footsteps echoed across the sidewalk. He pulled out his phone. It's done, he said. He's exactly who we thought he was. Time for phase 2. Back in the diner, Tom poured a coffee with trembling hands, spilling most of it on the counter. His world, once so certain, was shifting beneath him. He had always considered himself a good man, a man of values, a protector of traditions. But now, something darker was creeping in. Doubt. As the hours passed, Tom noticed things. Familiar faces were gone. Regulars who had once greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact. The few who did come in didn't stay long. Their conversations were quiet. Their eyes said what their mouths didn't. The silence hurt more than any protest ever could. By closing time, the diner was practically empty. Tom sat in a booth alone, head in his hands. For the first time, he allowed himself to ask the question that had been haunting him all day. What if I was wrong? Across town, John Carter sat alone in his modest living room, surrounded by the memories of a life well lived, framed photographs, old medals, and fading letters from another time. He picked up a picture of himself and Margaret, taken the day he returned from war. She looked so proud, so full of hope. He ran a finger gently across her face. "Oh, Margaret," he whispered. "What would you say if you saw what's happening now?" The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. Moments later, the door opened. Michael stepped inside. Father and son embraced without a word. The weight of the last 24 hours hung heavy between them. "How did it go?" John asked, settling into a chair. Michael's jaw tightened. About as expected. "He's not going to change easily, Dad. But don't worry. We've got a plan." John nodded slowly. I never thought it would come to this. Tom and I, we weren't close, but I always believed there was a basic respect between us." He looked away. His voice broke. "To find out that all this time he saw me as less than human, just because of the color of my skin. It hurts, son." Michael reached over and placed a steady hand on his father's shoulder. "Then let's make sure no one else has to feel that again." Michael leaned in, gently wrapping his hand around his father's weathered fingers. His voice was calm, but steady. "I know, Dad. I know it hurts. But it can't just be about what happened to you. It's bigger than that. It's about every person of color who's ever been dismissed, disrespected, or denied dignity. We have to take a stand, not just for you, but for all of them." John Carter looked into his son's eyes and saw something that both comforted and saddened him. The same fire that once burned in him, now passed down to the next generation. Pride swelled in his chest. But so did sorrow. This wasn't the world he wanted to leave behind. But at least he knew Michael had the strength and the position to fight back. "What's the next move?" John asked, his voice growing stronger. Michael's eyes flickered with quiet resolve, and something else, a plan already forming in the shadows. "Well, Dad, here's where it gets interesting. It turns out Tom Harris isn't exactly the king of his castle." Michael had been digging, and what he found changed everything. "The diner's in trouble," he explained. Financially, badly. He's been trying to sell it for years, but no one's taken the bait. John raised an eyebrow, surprised. But it's been in his family for generations. Exactly, Michael nodded. That's why he's been holding on. Pride, legacy. But after what happened yesterday, he may be more open to the idea, especially if the right offer comes along. John leaned back in his chair, suspicion creeping in. Michael, what are you planning? Michael's grin was subtle, confident, and just a little bit sly. Let's just say, Tom Harris is about to get an offer he can't refuse. And by the time we're done, that diner won't stand for division anymore. It'll stand for something completely different. As night fell across the town, the gears of change began to turn. And Tom Harris had no idea just how close his world was to collapsing. The next morning, Tom arrived early. Too early. He hadn't slept much. His night had been filled with visions of lawsuits, angry protesters, and headlines with his name in bold. As he stepped onto the familiar floor of his diner, his eyes caught something unusual. A thick envelope slipped under the door. His hands trembled as he picked it up and opened it. Inside, a formal offer to purchase the diner for nearly twice its market value. Anonymous, handled through a law firm he'd never heard of. Attached was a single note. This offer is time-sensitive. It requires your immediate departure and agreement not to open another business in the area. Tom's heart pounded. Who would do this? Why now? The truth stung. He'd considered selling before, more than once. But pride always got in the way. Now this felt like escape, a golden parachute from a firestorm of his own making. Still, the timing was too perfect. The terms, too pointed. Something wasn't right. Just then, the doorbell chimed. Sarah, his longtime waitress, walked in. She froze when she saw him. Tom, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Tom shoved the letter in his pocket. I'm fine, he muttered. Just got a lot on my mind. Sarah stepped closer, her voice soft but direct. Tom, about yesterday. What you did to Mr. Carter, it wasn't right. People are talking. Some say they're never coming back. Anger flared in Tom's chest. It's my diner. I can serve who I want. Sarah flinched. And in that moment, Tom felt it. Guilt. He ran a shaky hand through his graying hair. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean to snap. Everything's falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it. She studied him for a moment. Maybe start by apologizing. It's not too late. Tom looked away, jaw tight. The thought of apologizing went against everything he'd been raised to believe. But now, for the first time in his life, he wasn't so sure what he believed anymore. Meanwhile, across town, Michael Carter was seated in a community center surrounded by leaders, advocates, and neighbors, people fed up and ready to act. What happened to my father, Michael began, wasn't an isolated incident. It's a reflection of something deeper. But we have a chance to turn this into something powerful, something good. An older woman, head of the local NAACP chapter, leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Senator? Michael smiled, eyes shining. We buy the diner. Gasps, murmurs. Someone asked, why would we do that? Because we're going to transform it, Michael replied. We'll turn it into a community space, a place of inclusion, hope, and healing. Not a symbol of hate, but of unity, right here in the heart of our town. And as he outlined his vision, a cafe run by diverse staff, hosting local events, creating jobs, feeding people regardless of background, the energy in the room shifted from disbelief to resolve. At first, the room was filled with doubt, but as Michael Carter laid out his plan, skepticism slowly gave way to something else, excitement. People began to lean in, not just physically, but emotionally. They saw what he saw, potential, a chance to rewrite the town's future. Meanwhile, across town, John Carter sat quietly on his front porch, eyes heavy with memory. The events of the last few days had stirred something deep, ghosts from a past he'd tried to bury. He closed his eyes. and suddenly he was back in the thick jungle heat of Vietnam, gunfire, shouts, chaos. And there beside him was Tom Harris Sr., a fellow soldier, a brother in arms. They had fought side by side, their survival dependent on each other. But everything changed the day a terrified young black recruit panicked in the field. His mistake had cost lives, including that of Tom Sr.'s closest friend. The loss shattered Tom, but instead of blaming the war, the system, or the horrors they'd both endured, he blamed race. He let grief become hate, and that hate became a twisted legacy, passed down like a family heirloom to his son. Back in the present, John opened his eyes, a heavy sigh in his chest. He understood now. Tom Jr.'s prejudice wasn't born, it was inherited, but that didn't make it right. And John knew, if the cycle was ever going to end, someone had to break it. That evening, Tom Harris was closing up the diner when a quiet knock pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up and saw Michael Carter standing at the door. For a second, Tom considered walking away, pretending he didn't see him. But something in Michael's expression gave him pause. With a reluctant sigh, Tom opened the door. "We're closed," he muttered. "I know," Michael replied. "I'm not here for food." The two men stood in silence inside the empty diner, the air thick with everything unspoken. Then Michael cut straight to the point. "I know about the offer." Tom blinked. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter," Michael interrupted. "What matters is what you're going to do with it." Tom looked exhausted, the weight of the last few days pressing down hard. "I don't know," he admitted. "This place, it's all I've got. It's my father's legacy." Michael's tone softened, but only slightly. "Is that really the legacy you want to protect? One of hate? One of division?" The words hit hard. Tom didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew Michael was right. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "I want you to make a choice," Michael said, stepping closer. "A real one. Choose to be better, not just for you, but for this town, for the next generation. Break the cycle. Be the man your father couldn't be." Tom met his gaze, and for the first time in years, he didn't see anger or judgment. He saw hope, and something in him, something old and rigid, finally began to crack. The next morning, as the sun rose over town, Tom Harris stood outside his diner, keys in hand. He took a long breath, then slowly he unlocked the door and stepped inside, for what he knew might be the final time. The familiar smell of coffee and grease filled his nose, pulling him back to childhood memories, his father behind the counter, laughter in the booths, simpler days. But those memories were tangled now, tainted by bitterness. Tom walked to the back office, sat down in the creaky old chair, and pulled out the offer letter once more. He read it, paused, then picked up the phone and dialed. "This is Tom Harris," he said, voice low, tight with emotion. "About the offer, I accept." He hung up, and for a moment he sat still, letting the wave of emotion crash over him. Grief, relief, uncertainty, and deep beneath it all, hope. Across town, Michael Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced down. A small smile touched his lips. "It's done," he said, looking up at his father across the breakfast table. Tom accepted. John Carter nodded slowly, eyes reflecting decades of pain and pride. "And now?" he asked. Michael's smile grew. "Now, Dad, we start phase 2. It's time to turn that diner into something that brings this town together, something that finally heals what's been broken for far too long." In the days that followed, the town was buzzing. Word had spread. Tom Harris had sold the diner. Rumors flew. Was a chain restaurant moving in? Was someone tearing it down? No one knew for sure. But behind the scenes, a transformation was already underway. Everyone thought it had been turned into just another trendy cafe. But when the truth came out, it stunned the whole town. On a sunny Saturday, a crowd gathered outside the newly renovated diner, curious about what had replaced the once divisive place. At noon sharp, the doors opened, and standing there with a calm smile was John Carter. "Welcome," he said, his voice steady. "Welcome to the veterans' table." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Just weeks earlier, John had been thrown out of this very diner because of the color of his skin, and now he owned it. As guests entered, they were met with a space completely transformed. The walls displayed photos and memorabilia honoring veterans of all races. A massive mural showed diverse soldiers standing side by side. At the center, two figures resembling a young John Carter and Tom Harris Sr., embracing as brothers in arms. John addressed the room. This place has long divided us, but today we make it a place of unity and healing for everyone. He explained that the Veterans Table would serve as more than a diner. It would be a hub for veterans and community members to connect, share stories, and break barriers. Then came one final surprise. John gestured to the kitchen. "Please welcome our new head chef." Tom Harris, the same man who once refused to serve John, stepped out in a chef's uniform. He looked nervous, shoulders hunched, but his voice was sincere. "I know I'm the last person you expected, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But thanks to John and Michael Carter, I've been given a second chance, and I promise I'll spend every day earning it." The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Others followed. It wasn't full forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. John closed with, "The Veterans Table is about second chances. It's about healing old wounds. And it's open to all of you." Over the next few months, the diner became a symbol of transformation. Veterans, locals, and visitors gathered regularly for meals, open discussions, and events aimed at bridging generational and racial divides. Tom worked tirelessly, changing hearts one plate at a time. Slowly, the community began to see him not for who he was, but for who he was becoming. Their story spread. News outlets covered it. A documentary was filmed. And then, nearly a year later, the man whose hatred started it all, Tom Harris Sr., visited the diner in a wheelchair. Upon seeing the mural, the diverse crowd, and his son working side by side with people he once rejected, he wept. "I was wrong," he whispered to John. From that day forward, the Veterans Table became a national model for community healing. Schools taught about it. Cities replicated its mission. And then came a call that no one expected. They had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, not because they were perfect, but because they proved that change is possible, even when it starts in the most unlikely of places.